Well, welcome everyone to week number 2 and our discussion of classic organization theory. I thought in this video, I'll just very briefly introduce you to a couple of the main theorists in classic organization theory, primarily Max Weber, Frederick Taylor, talk about their theories again, as briefly as I can, and then turn our attention to the assignments that you'll be doing this week for our course. So in classic organization theory, when we talk about Max Weber and Frederick Taylor, we are looking at both their similarities and their differences. There are some threads that tie Max Weber and Frederick Taylor together, and there are some stark differences as well. One of the threads that ties Weber and Taylor together is their desire for finding the one best way, to try and find the one way to either structure our organizations or organize work within our organizations for the purpose of achieving organizational goals. So the primary objective of both Weber as well as Taylor was to try and make the organization efficient and effective, and the emphasis was really placed upon the organization's goals as compared to the goals of individual employees. So to start with Max Weber. Weber, again, was writing in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, and he was really focused on the structure of the organization. He placed a very high value upon bureaucracies. He really felt that a bureaucratic organization was what he referred to as the highest level of rational thought. Weber believed in empiricism. He believed that we should make our decisions based upon empirical evidence. And by the word empirical, we're talking about something that's tangible, something that we can see or feel or sense. So he's talking about we'll use tangible information that we can acquire and we can measure, and we'll use that information in order to make our decisions, as opposed to just making decisions based upon our beliefs. Just because we think something is true, we need to go out there and collect the empirical evidence to prove that it is true. So he believed in empiricism, and he believed in law. He believed in the importance of laws, of rules, and regulations. Well, where do you find laws and rules and regulations in? You find them in strong structural bureaucratic organizations. So he really believed that bureaucracy was what he considered to be the highest level of rationalization. Weber introduces us to 3 different types of authority: charismatic authority, traditional authority, and a legal rational basis for authority. In a charismatic authority type of an approach, the administrative structure that would underpin charismatic approaches to authority is this charismatic administration, whereby a leader leads by virtue of their personality, their charisma. So what happens when you have someone who leads by the virtue and strength of their personality, on the virtue of their charisma, is that you end up getting very loyal followers. And so the followers would follow this leader because they really see themselves in this leader, and they see what they aspire to be in this leader. So you end up getting very loyal types of followers. The problem with charismatic administration is that charismatic leader, when they leave the organization, the basis for power leaves with that individual because the authority resides within that individual leader. So when the leader goes, the authority leaves the organization as well. His second authority is what he calls traditional authority. Traditional authority we saw in the past historically in things like patriarchal or patrimonial types of administrative structures. In a patriarchal administrative structure, the leader essentially leads based upon close family and friends. And so the administrative structure does not extend beyond the close nuclear family. So the patriarch of the family leads that very small nucleus family, and that nucleus family follows that leader because they're all members of the same clan or the same cadre. Patrimonial administration is, again, a traditional authority type of an approach. But in patrimonial administration, the government becomes a little bit more external, a little bit more decentralized. And so it goes beyond just the nucleus family and then moves beyond that to maybe extended family, very, very close associates, very close personal friends. Those are the ones who are administering the policies in a patrimonial type of administrative system. In a feudal administrative system, again, still part of this traditional authority structure, in a feudal administrative system, this is where you have governance externally by political allies. So the leader would induce political allies to do what that leader wants them to do by providing them with political capital, by providing them with money or land or power sources of their own. But it would be this kind of transactional process by which they would get people to be their allies and do what they want them to do. But the patriarchal, the patrimonial, and the feudal administrative systems are all part of this authority known as the traditional approaches to authority. The third type of authority is what he calls legal rational, and this is where bureaucracies come into play. So a bureaucratic administrative structure is an example of a legal rational authority system, whereby the administration is being done by technical administrators who have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do the job. This is what Weber believed in. He believed in bureaucratic administration. But what type of bureaucratic administration did Weber believe in? He believed that organizations could be structured as what he calls ideal bureaucracies. So his search was a search to try and find the ideal structure of an organization to make that organization as efficient and effective as possible. For Weber, an ideal bureaucratic structure, an ideal organizational structure, consists of things such as division of labor. We divide up the work among the different members of our organization. When we divide the work up among different members of our organization, each member of the organization will specialize in their own task. So they will have certain tasks that they are doing on a daily basis because they are specializing in those tasks. What happens when you specialize in tasks? You become experts in those tasks that you are doing on a daily basis. So this specialization then creates expertise within this ideal bureaucracy. The ideal bureaucracy is structured in what we call a tall hierarchical type of structure. You have one person at the top. Then as you move down the organizational structure, you encounter more and more people. This is that triangular type of shape, where one person at the top, as you move down, you have more and more employees. The bottom level of your organization, that's where most of your employees reside. Power flows from the top. In this tall hierarchy, you have what's called a span of control, in that managers are only responsible for a certain number of employees. So a manager may only be responsible for 3 or 5 or 7 employees, and that is that manager's span of control. By having this span of control, everyone knows to whom they are accountable as you move up the organizational chain. That, as you move up the organizational chain, is what's called unity of command. So you are responsible to this person above you, they are responsible to the person above them, who's responsible to the person above them, and so on until you get to the apex of your pyramid, which is the leader of the organization. Everything in that organization is bound by rules, regulations, and policies. So you have policy manuals, procedure manuals, and people adhere to those policies, those procedures. The people who work in an ideal bureaucratic structure are professional administrators who are there for a career. They are committed to the organization. They're not free agents who are there for a year and then moving on. They are professionals who are committed to that organization. And everything the organization does is written down in documentation. You rely upon written documentation because, again, this is part of this legal, rational type of approach to authority. If you have everything documented, you can apply those written rules and regulations uniformly across every individual you come into contact with. So everyone is treated in a fair and equal manner. So his ideal bureaucracy is very structurally based. And if we can structure our organization to meet all of those different principles, if you will, of an ideal bureaucratic structure, we can then be efficient and effective as an organization. Now, clearly, Weber's ideal bureaucracy, going back to the Tompkins textbook and that first anchor in the Tompkins textbook, clearly his ideal bureaucratic structure, the way in which you measure organizational effectiveness is by emphasizing things like control. So it emphasizes the internal process model of organizational effectiveness. It also emphasizes the rational goal model of organizational effectiveness as well, because we have an organizational goal that we are trying to achieve, and that's to make the organization efficient and effective. The way in which we do it is by controlling the internal processes within that organization. We control and coordinate work primarily through direct supervision and primarily through standardization of work processes and standardization of worker skills. So there's a lot of standardization and a lot of top-down direct supervision. How do we motivate employees? We motivate them primarily through legal compliance. So one of the criticisms of Max Weber is that it was a pretty dehumanizing type of approach, in that we would fit people within this organizational structure and will then hold them accountable for following the written rules and regulations. If you deviate from those written rules and regulations, then there'll be punitive measures that you will suffer through, again, legal compliance. So we motivated people in a very negative type of punitive way. What Weber's telling us is that if we structure our organization like this ideal bureaucracy, very top-down in our organizational hierarchy, if we have written rules and regulations, if we divide up the work and people specialize in certain tasks day in and day out, we can create this efficient and effective organization. Clearly, one of the limitations associated with Weber is the inability of the theory to come to grips with individual employees who really want to develop as human resources. It really didn't provide people with an avenue to develop as human resources. They were just parts of the organization. They had a job to do. They did their job. They followed rules and regulations. And if they didn't follow those rules and regulations, there will be penalties to be paid. But it was a very dehumanizing type of approach to individuals within the organization. But Weber focused on the structure. Can we find the one best way to structure our organization to make our organization efficient and effective? If we can find that one best way, this ideal bureaucratic structure, we can then apply this ideal bureaucratic structure to all other organizations to make all those other organizations efficient and effective as well. It really was kind of searching for that silver bullet, searching for that magic bullet, that magic approach that can then be applied uniformly across all organizations. Our second main classical theorist in the classical school that we cover in this course is Frederick Taylor. And you've read about Frederick Taylor before in his scientific management, so I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with scientific management. But scientific management really came about because of a perceived need for creating this science of management. We needed to come up with a science whereby we can study management in order to come up with the correct way to do management. In other words, we're trying to find the one best way in order to do our jobs in organizations. Why was there this perceived need for a science of management? Well, at the time in which Taylor was writing, which is the early 1900s and then the 1920s, there was this void, this gap, if you will, in a lot of our organizations where we didn't have middle managers. You know, today you go into an organization, you find a whole lot of middle managers in the middle part of that organizational chart. Back then, we had people leading the organization, and we had a whole bunch of people at the bottom working in the organization, but we had a gap, a chasm, if you will, between your line employees working on an everyday basis in the organization and those who are charged with leading the organization. So hopefully scientific management would help fill in that gap of this lack of middle managers. Because there's a lack of middle managers, we had little supervision and guidance that was being given to people at the lower levels of the organization in terms of how to specifically do their job on a daily basis. We had a lot of labor unrest. At that time, and just before that, you had books like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. We are recognizing a lot of the problems in the workplace that were going on that were threatening the life and the safety of individual employees, led to a lot of labor unrest. So Taylor felt that by developing this science of management, you could address those three problems by focusing on how best to do jobs within our organization. Now, because you didn't have middle level managers, you had a lot of employees in the organization who were kind of just going at it on their own. And so they didn't have a whole lot of supervision. So they were engaging in what Taylor referred to as soldiering. Soldiering is a process of just doing enough just to get along. That you're not working too hard, you're not working too hard toward achieving goals and objectives. You're doing just as much as you need to do to collect your paycheck and get along on a day-by-day basis. He wanted his science of management to try and eliminate this soldiering type of process on the part of employees. He also wanted to select standards for the selection of the quote-unquote right employee for a job. He felt we needed to identify clearly, here are the skills that are necessary for an employee to do the job in an efficient and effective way. So come up with basically the skills we are looking for in new employees. He wanted to set standards to try and systematize the production process. If we come up with a systemized process of doing the job, then teach all employees how to do it in that systematic way, we will be efficient and we will be effective. We not only have to systematize the process, we have to systematize the tools that are used by employees in doing their daily jobs. Essentially, what we are doing is we are looking for the one best way to do a job. If we can identify the one best way to do a job that's the most efficient way of getting that job done, then teach that one best way of doing the job to all of our employees, we will be efficient and effective as an organization. When employees do their job in that one best way, when they follow orders and they do the job the way they're supposed to do it, they should be compensated. We should have reward for performance. If you're doing the job in the one best way, you're being efficient, you will get rewarded with additional compensation. So this is kind of your introduction to the idea of pay for performance in organizations. Not only do employees specialize in certain tasks like they did under Weber, but managers specialize in those tasks as well. And so we would create these managers who would be informed in terms of the jobs that employees were doing and could then supervise those employees to make sure they're doing their jobs in that one best way. You're filling in that gap of middle management that existed prior to the development of scientific management. So how do you then do it? Well, you do it through what he called the time motion studies. And so literally he would have somebody who today would be called a performance analyst, but someone who would, with a stopwatch, stand behind someone as they were doing the job. And one of the basic, simple examples of this is shoveling pig ore. So you have an employee who is shoveling pig ore. The pig ore would be in this pile. The employee would have a shovel, and then there would be a cart. You would time how long it took them to take the shovel and put it into the pig ore. The amount of time it took them to pick the pig ore up on the shovel. The amount of time it took them to take the pig ore over to the cart. The amount of time to dump the pig ore in the cart. The amount of time to walk back in the pile and start the process again. You would time every single movement that the employee took. The idea would be that you would take all of the efficient movements, combine them together, take all the inefficient movements and get rid of them. And once you combine all the efficient movements together, you then create this one best way to do the job. Well, you've now identified the most efficient way to do the job. You now train all your employees how to do the job in that one best way. If everyone's doing their job in that one best way, everyone's being efficient. If everyone's being efficient, then the organization is being efficient as well. That was this idea of time motion studies for the purpose of creating the one best way to do the job, which is the underlying approach of what he called scientific management. Well, from an efficiency standpoint, it kind of makes sense until we realize that there are a lot of limitations that are associated with scientific management. You think about it in terms of some of the criticisms. So if you are basically telling people what to do and how to do it, and then you're going to watch them on a daily basis to make sure they're doing what they're doing, what happens if they're not doing things efficiently? What do you then do to those employees? You get rid of them. For Taylor, an employee was merely a cog in the machinery of the organization. And you can picture all, how cogs work, and they all have teeth on them. And the tooth of one cog pushes against the tooth of another cog, which makes that cog turn, which in turn then turns the tooth of another cog, and so on and so on. If one of your cogs has a broken tooth, you take that cog out, you throw it away, you replace it with a new cog, and the machinery then works efficiently again. So it was a dehumanizing approach to individual employees. They were nothing more than just cogs or pieces of the organizational machinery. If you actually sit down and read a lot of Taylor's writings, you'll see that he refers to employees as being, quote unquote, boorish beasts. He thought of employees as being not very intelligent, as certainly not being creative. He viewed them as people who just need to be taught how to do the job and then held accountable for doing the job in the way that they were taught. So it's a very dehumanizing approach to individual employees. Also, when you are looking for the one best way to do the job, you are again looking for that panacea. You're looking for, here's the one best way, and it will work in every organization that is doing this type of job. It's not that simple. And one of the things that we see, one of the threads that ties all the development of organization theory literature together, is that in modern organization theory, we have moved away from that search for the one best way. For Weber, it was the one best way to structure the organization. For Taylor, it was the one best way to do jobs within the organization. So Weber focused on structure, Taylor focused on process. That's what differentiated the two, but what tied them together is they are both looking for the one best way. For Taylor and scientific management with his models of organizational effectiveness, it's the same two models that we saw favored under the Weberian ideal bureaucracy approach. Internal process model as well as a rational goal model. In terms of the mechanisms for coordination and control, again, we've got this direct supervision where we are directly supervising employees, but more so standardization. And what we are really focusing on with Taylor is the standardization of work processes, the standardization of work outputs, standardization of work skills. We're really trying to standardize those jobs within our organization. How we motivate our employees, primarily legal compliance, and now rewards for performance, instrumental rewards. So we're not only going to penalize them for not doing the job in the one best way, but now we're also going to start rewarding them by giving them pay for performance, which is a little different than what Weber did. Weber just looked at penalizing. Here we're looking at rewarding them if they're doing the job appropriately and correctly. But again, Weber and Taylor are both tied together by their dehumanizing approach to how they dealt with individual employees. It's that dehumanizing approach that led to the creation of neoclassical theories like human relations and human resource management theories to try and address this dehumanization of individual employees. And so it's really these criticisms and these flaws of the classical school that led to the creation of some of the neoclassical theories that we will focus on next week in next week's video. Okay, so now that we have this general working knowledge of two of the major classical theorists, Max Weber and his ideal bureaucracy, and Frederick Taylor and his scientific management, let's take a look at how this week we are going to be applying those theories. So in your primary assignments for this week, you have again a discussion board assignment on classic organization theorists. For this one in step one, you'll again develop a PowerPoint presentation that you're familiar with doing based on your idea for a task force. So the idea that you presented last week. Discuss some of the ways in which classic organization theories such as Weber and scientific management might manifest themselves in this new task force. Section will be evaluated based upon the appropriateness and strength of the argument, provide depth of theory gained from the textbook and classic articles, and use examples to support your positions. Remember, do not directly quote from textbooks, but rather explain your concepts in words based upon the readings. So what you're doing is taking that task force that you presented last week, and you're going to talk about some of the ways that a Weberian or a Taylor type of approach could contribute to the bureaucratic structure you would create within this task force. So you're going to create that presentation, you'll narrate that presentation, host the presentation, and then as always respond to a minimum of 2 of your classmates. Then you also have a journal entry that is due this week. Again, always for the journal entries, please type directly into the journal text box. Do not attach a Word document. Reflect on the following ideas and enter your thoughts into the journal. It can be written in first person, must be written at a master's level of insight and reflection. Please discuss topics in your books, but there's no need to use citations in the journal. Again, the journal is kind of a think piece. Drawing on information from the Tompkins textbook and articles in the Shafritz book, please discuss the following. Section 1, Weber's theory of bureaucracy. Provide your insights on the 3 types of legitimacy. And we talked about the charismatic, the traditional, and the legal rational. Provide your insights on those 3 different types of legitimacy and how those may impact your proposed task force. What are the limitations of a bureaucratic model and how do these relate to your task force? How is bureaucracy relevant? So how is it relevant for public management using concepts from Tompkins? Section 2 will be on scientific management. Provide an overview of Taylor's system using Taylor's article and information from Tompkins. Provide a brief overview of the criticisms of scientific management, and then what are the strengths and weaknesses of scientific management for your proposed task force. Post should be approximately 250 to 500 words and demonstrate a deep reflection of the topics covered. Post must be free of spelling and grammatical errors to receive full points. So your 2 assignments this week, a discussion board and a journal entry, both linking people like Weber and Taylor to the task force that you presented in your post last week. So those are our 2 assignments for this week. I hope you enjoy the reading material and some of the concepts. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out and email me. Otherwise, I wish everyone a very good week. I hope it's productive, and I'll talk to you again in our week 3 video for next week.